If I ask you to think about capitalism, to think about business and Wall Street and the stock market, can you think of a famous speech that sums up all of it? The speech that comes to my mind is from a movie called Wall Street, which was released 36 years ago. That film had a character, a ruthless corporate raider named Gordon Gekko, who was played by Michael Douglas. And if you remember, Gordon was not exactly a good guy. He wasn't a hero, and frankly, he was a villain. And yet his speech from that film seems to have defined capitalism and Wall Street and VC behavior for many, many years. You know the one I'm talking about. It's the one where he stood up and told a group of new hires that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Really? Is that the point we want to make to our children? Is that the legacy that we as business people want to leave behind? I don't think so, and I don't think anyone in this room truly believes that. On the contrary, I think most people in this room, and frankly all around the world, recognize that there is something fundamentally flawed with the way capitalism has been practiced. All we have to do is look at where it's led us, to a rapidly shrinking middle class, to disturbing increases in homelessness, hunger, to corporate-induced environmental disasters. Even in such necessities as food, in the name of inflation, price hikes have become something we've become really used to. More importantly, look at the massive disparity between the rich and the poor, the chasm between the excessively wealthy and everyone else. The fact that a small handful of individuals own more of the world's wealth than the billions of people who inhabit this planet is frankly destabilizing. It is bad for humanity, and it only seems to be getting worse. Perhaps we're well past time to start talking about these subjects and the fundamental things that can be done about them. How can we better use the power of business to make the world a better place? And I believe that can truly be done. How can we elevate business in order to serve humanity? And as a fundamental part of that, how can we bring more enjoyment and fulfillment to those whose lives our businesses touch, including our own? I don't know about you, but for me, business, capitalism, and the idea of entrepreneurship represented joy from the very beginning. At 7 years old, I lived with my parents in a small town in Iran, a town that was not at all hospitable to people like me. As the youngest member of a Baha'i family, we were not treated well. And often, rocks were thrown at our home, and sometimes a lot worse than that. And this is despite the fact that our faith teaches nothing but peace. Many of our fundamentalist neighbors had been taught to hate us. And this is something that I lived with throughout my childhood. And growing up as a Baha'i in Iran in the 70s and 80s was not easy. And it's not easy now, that's for sure. So how did I escape the daily challenges and traumas when I was so young? In part by playing Monopoly. My mother offered to bring me a present from her visit to Tehran one day. And the one thing I wanted more than anything in the world was a Monopoly set at 7 years old. And she brought me one, a special edition Monopoly game featuring the names of popular streets in Tehran instead of Park Place or Boardwalk. And I loved it. I begged my family and friends to play it with me all the time. The game clearly had an influence on me. Over the next 2 years, I found myself assessing my net worth, adding up the value of various pencils and books and items of clothing I owned, just out of curiosity. One day, when an older boy made a nice comment about the baseball cap I was wearing, I sold it to him for more than my mother had paid for it. That did not make my mom happy. But it gave me some insight into how to make money in real life. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was living in Tehran, buying clothing at the bazaar on the other side of town, bringing it home and then selling it on a table in front of a local grocery store for a profit. And after the revolution, when the fundamentalist religious government took over our country and banned the import of most Western goods, I handmade Monopoly sets out of cardboard and paper and sold those games on the streets. They look a lot better than it sounds like. They were nice cardboards. Making money was fun for me. My entrepreneurial endeavors gave me freedom during a time of oppression. And it was the money my parents saved and the few dollars I sewed into the lining of a small duffel bag that would allow me to escape through the desert under cover of darkness when opposition and daily threats of my life grew too much to bear. At 17 years old, I arrived in the US as a refugee. Embracing American capitalism to the fullest, I put myself through school, and I did work hard. As some of you know, shortly after college, my brother and I created a company called AutoWeb. We took our business public in 1999. And by the end of the very first day of trading, our company was valued at over $1 billion. I was 27, and my personal net worth on paper skyrocketed. But did that enable me to leave a positive mark? Not really. Because the real money that was made on that deal and on that day went to many who had very little interest in making the world a better place. A group that was driven by, you guessed it, greed. I felt that capitalism had failed me and my company and my employees. Not that I blame everyone but myself. I'm sure they played Monopoly too. It's what the contemporary version of capitalism had taught them, had taught us. For decades, they and almost everyone in the business world believed the notion that greed is good at any cost. The Gordon Gekko philosophy rewarded them personally with financial gains again and again, often at the expense of others. More on the specifics of what went wrong with that IPO can be found in the book I'll be releasing soon. For now, you can look up the term laddering as it relates to the stock market. The company should have never been worth $1 billion. How many of the billionaires we know became billionaires by generating positive cash flow and actually generating billions in profit? Very few. Majority of them acquired their wealth from stock appreciation, which is based in part on perception and at times quarterly management of the stock price, often from companies that have kept on raising more money to satisfy losses. Once again, it's a bit of a game. Please know that I'm not suggesting every company that goes public represents a manipulated stock price or suggesting that every billionaire compromised their ethics along the way. Not at all. However, I am talking from firsthand and based on personal experience and what I have witnessed. Some of it is, in fact, rigged. To me, that kind of wealth accumulated by individuals or companies and a never-ending thirst to maximize one's ability to consume and accumulate more seems as useless as monopoly money. It's a dead end. It's rooted in philosophies that now seem outdated because greed doesn't contribute to the betterment of the world or personal happiness. And I do believe that wealth generated based on moral principles and values will automatically be capped at a more reasonable level than what we seem to be witnessing today. In 2017, the Universal House of Justice released a letter addressing these sorts of unsustainable economic practices. Many of the topics we wish to address at this summit can be found in this document. So I'd like to read you one small passage. Time and again, avarice and self-interest prevail at the expense of the common good. Unconscionable quantities of wealth are being amassed, and the instability this creates is made worse by how income and opportunity are spread so unevenly, both between nations and within nations. But it need not be so. However much conditions are the outcome of history, they do not have to define the future. And even if current approaches to economic life satisfied humanity's stage of adolescence, they are certainly inadequate for its dawning age of maturity. There is no justification for continuing to perpetuate structures, rules, and systems that manifestly fail to serve the interests of all peoples. There's an inherent moral dimension to the generation, distribution, and utilization of wealth and resources. Imagine a moral dimension, a spiritual dimension to doing business. And we're not talking about socialism. We're talking about rethinking of how we do business and approach our collective economic lives. An approach infused with a belief in the nobility of humanity, the idea that our resources should be used as a means to care for fellow human beings.
Think of sharing what you know.